Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Building the ROI for Driver Performance and Safety Management, a look at how improving driver performance can translate into better fuel efficiency, lower insurance premiums, reduced truck maintenance costs, and more. This webinar is presented by GreenRoad, a leader in driver performance and safety management technologies for fleets and other organizations. I'm your host, Laura Sawinski, Editor-in-Chief for Food Logistics. Thanks for joining us. First, a few housekeeping tips for our audience. Slides will appear in your screen console accompanied by live audio from our presenter. They will update as he moves through the presentation, similar to a typical PowerPoint presentation. You can use the F5 key to refresh your viewer if necessary. This is an interactive webinar, and we've reserved time at the end of the presentation for Q&A. You can submit questions during the webinar by using the question box area on your screen, and we'll try to answer as many of your questions as possible. If we cannot get to all of the questions during the webinar, they will be answered by email following the event. In addition, we will have an archived version of this webinar posted on the Food Logistics website at www.foodlogistics.com. Now let me introduce today's presenters. David Coleman is Senior Vice President, Global Business Development for GreenRoad. David has been actively involved in the automotive technology industry for over 16 years. Prior to joining GreenRoad in 2008, he spent 14 years as a fleet management technology professional with PHH Arval, where he served as Vice President, Telematics. Tracy Leonard is Director of Safety for Premier Beverage Company, LLC, a subsidiary of Chalmers Sunbelt Group, New York, New York. Tracy has more than 24 years' experience in the safety field. Prior to joining Premier Beverage Company, he was a safety officer in the U.S. Navy and EHS Regional Manager for Waste Management. And with that, I'll turn it over to our first speaker, David Coleman.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you everybody out on the phone lines and the internet for joining us today. As Laura said, I'm the VP of Business Development for GreenRoad. GreenRoad is the leader in driving performance and safety management. We are working with clients today, kind of globally, transforming their cultures. We have 85,000 fleet drivers that are really driving now and changing the way they're driving for the performance of their companies. So they're the best drivers on the road, getting the best mile per gallon per mile driven, and they're the least likely to be involved in a crash. Today we're putting about 3 billion safer miles annually on the road, and the results our customers are achieving, about 50% reduction in crashes and crash costs. We're seeing around a 10% reduction in fuel consumption, and maybe the most critical factor here when we're looking at innovations in technology and fleet is making sure that we have a positive ROI for the projects very quickly. So today's agenda, I'm going to basically work through four major topics. First being the impact of driver performance. So why is it important that we're talking about driving performance? And when we think about technologies for the vehicles, we've been optimizing engines. We've been looking at various ways to streamline fairings on trucks, et cetera, to get a couple percentage points of miles per gallon. And we've really exhausted, I think, traditional methods for improving fuel economy. So yeah, we're looking at hybrids, I think, and LNG and CNG kind of technologies. But as we look at our existing fleet, what we can optimize are the people that are actually driving the vehicles. So the second thing we're going to talk about is building the business case for driver performance, and then specifically get into how do we calculate an ROI. And then we're very fortunate having Tracy from the Premier Beverage Group of Charmer Sunbelt, and have Tracy talk about specifically the project that they've been working on for the last couple of years and the performance they've been getting from the project. So when we think about driver performance, there's really a quadrant of challenges, right? So the people we put behind the wheel of our vehicles know how to drive. So yeah, we do some training, we do some hands and seats and mirrors, and we do some kind of iterative skills-based training. But folks primarily know how to drive. The question now becomes is the conscious choices they make when they're behind the wheel of our vehicles. So those choices that they decide when they're in the moment and they get behind the wheel affect direct operating costs, so fuel consumption, vehicle maintenance, tires, brakes. My frequency of braking and then reaccelerating, these have real consequences to kind of wear and tear of the asset. How I handle speed, how I come into and out of turns, all of these things that I'm doing when I don't have a manager riding with me, and or I don't have a professional coach. When I resort to just the behaviors that I have impact safety, they impact the environment. So 33% of vehicle emissions are choices I make in how I decide to drive. And we think about our corporate policies, and we have driver handbooks. We put policies in front of our drivers, and we ask them to comply with those policies, and then we largely measure the performance of our people against who's been caught. So if we keep doing kind of the same thing, we're going to get the same results. So I think addressing driver performance and looking at new technology is really the only way we're going to take a bite out of some of the issues we have from a fleet perspective. So when we think about crashes, many people that are on the call today may be familiar with kind of this consequence pyramid. And you think about orange, kind of the reddish areas in the pyramid. Today we're thinking about crashes, and occasionally we've got severe, and hopefully very infrequently we have catastrophic. But when we think about our training programs, we think about how we finance for risk, what our insurance costs are. Most of those things are based on what's happened in the past. So we look at the last 5 years of crashes, and that's basically part of what's going to go into how I'm financed for risk for the upcoming renewal. When I think about the training programs I'm going to build for this year, I'm looking at last year's crashes. But to really understand and to change the dynamic and get proactive on controls, we really need to be addressing the in-the-moment driving error. So as we're sitting here, we've got, as a group of people on a phone, we have thousands and thousands of drivers that are on the road making mistakes, and so a lot of those mistakes are close calls. So fortunately, somebody's compensating for the mistake. So if we can get at the bottom of this pyramid and change the way people drive, then the entire pyramid gets smaller, and that's really the goal on the safety side, to take crashes out. And then, real briefly on fuel, we may get a little bit of a reprieve here at the end of this year, but I think a lot of folks came into 2012 budgeting for about $3.50, somewhere between $3.35, say, and $3.50 a gallon, and I think most of us are going to blow through kind of that fuel budget, and it's unfortunate that we really don't have a way to control costs of fuel. I mean, we can think about switching to alternative fuels, but that requires buying new vehicles. That requires looking at infrastructure changes in how we fuel and service and kind of warranty around the vehicles. So, unfortunately, we have on-the-road assets that our best, most addressable solution is impacting those existing assets. And today, those choices people are making in real time behind the wheel can have up to a 33% impact on fuel. So, fuel consumption and crash consequences are behavior related. So I'm going to segue now into specifically what is GreenRoad doing from a service? So how does GreenRoad work? So I'm going to describe it kind of in a three-step process. So step one, we have an in-vehicle system that is providing real-time feedback to the drivers. And that feedback is specific for the vehicle type that they're in. So how you drive an Econoline 350 is different than how you drive a 9-panel beverage truck, is different than how you drive a Class 8 tractor trailer. So the feedback that the driver is getting is specific to the vehicle that they're driving. So in step one, we're identifying the driving maneuver that they're making in real time, and then we compare that maneuver against what's correct or optimal and safe for that maneuver. So if I'm making a left-hand turn and I'm accelerating into that left-hand turn and I'm putting, undue wear and tear on the tires and I'm accelerating beyond what would be optimal for that left-hand turn, upon the completion of that maneuver, I'm going to receive feedback. So if it's a little bit beyond what would be optimal, I'm going to receive a yellow grade. If it's significantly beyond what is considered optimal for that maneuver, I'm going to receive a red flash from the in-vehicle display. So now what's happening in the vehicle is I'm receiving that real-time feedback. It's real-time coaching. I'm incented and I'm participating as a driver in adhering to the policy. So as a company, I can say, this is how I want my vehicles represented on the road. This is what I consider safe. This is what I consider efficient. This is how I want my brand represented when you're behind the wheel. And I'm going to give that driver the autonomy through the feedback to interact with the service in real time and hold themselves accountable for being the best. So that's your first line of defense. Step two, we're transmitting all of the data. So all of the good driving, all of the indifferent driving, all of the bad driving, all of that information is being transmitted over the wireless network and then is available in step three on a traditional management website. So benchmark reporting, drill down capabilities, exception-based reporting. So first and foremost, I want my drivers to be that first line of defense and responding in real time, but I want to be able to empower my supervisors to have exception-based access and information to help coach folks that need a little more help than just in vehicle. I also want my management team to understand kind of what's going on the road, and kind of as a fourth line of defense, I want my risk management folks, and that may be my broker, that may be my insurance carrier, it may be my risk management team, but that fourth line of defense of people working with the information, making sure I'm designing the right programs for my fleet. So what that results in is a complete kind of driver improvement loop. So 5 categories of behavior that I'm evaluating in real time: acceleration, braking, lane handling, corner handling, speed handling, both max speed as well as speed by speed zone. I have all of the information for post-trip analysis. I have all the tools I need for online training and online coaching. So the relationship now between the supervisors and the drivers is now a proactive, ahead of a crash, working in advance and designing appropriate messages, communication, training for a driver as they're demonstrating challenges. And then, of course, the last piece, and maybe the most important piece, is from a cultural change standpoint, is making sure I have the right incentives. So, putting people in teams and having them compete for the best driver. some simple tricks, and I think Tracy will talk about this, putting the driver list, the ranking list in the break room and watching as people come in the morning and they see, have they moved up the list? They go get behind the wheel, they drive, they're responding, trying to drive green, making sure they're not making mistakes, and they come back and look and see, am I the best driver in the fleet? So, I think the goal is, here we are today, kind of in that before picture with a bunch of errors that are going on the road, a bunch of near misses, processing crashes. That's our before picture. And that before picture correlates to what we're spending in fuel and how we're financing for risk and the crashes that we're having and the indirect and, direct and indirect expenses. And now I've changed the culture. I'm going to move that down to kind of an after profile. And, that after profile, the difference between these two is really where the ROI lies. So I'm going to walk a little bit through a couple slides here on, what does it look like if I'm a supervisor? So I think I've explained pretty well what the in-vehicle relationship and process looks like for the driver. Let's talk about a supervisor. So I'm a supervisor. I have internet access. I have a user ID and password, and I'll have access to the vehicles that are under my under my control. So when I log in, I'm going to get a high-level dashboard view of the vehicles that are in my group. So, there are a couple things that come up on the screen right away that I'm interested in managing. How am I doing today in terms of safety? So, we think of safe driving as making 20 or fewer mistakes in a 10-hour period. That's green. 20 to 50 is yellow. 50 or more mistakes in a 10-hour period is red. So when I log in as this fleet, what jumps out right away is I'm a 34. So, I'm not doing quite as well as I want to do. I want to be moving that down. The next thing I see as I move across the right here, the next box, is, how am I doing week over week over week? And right now as a fleet, I'm pretty solidly, between the 25, kind of 35 arena. And then when I look across my fleet, again, moving to the right, how are my drivers binning out in terms of how many greens, how many yellows, how many reds? And, hey, the great news here is the biggest chunk of the pie are my folks right now are doing exactly what I've asked them to do. So that green, those green drivers, whether it's from a quantity standpoint or percentage standpoint, they're doing exactly what I've asked them to do when they're behind the wheel. Yellows, those folks could either be moving toward the green if I have the right cultural and right incentive rewards and management practices in place. They could be moving toward green, or conversely, they could be in the red. But I certainly can now laser focus on the reds. That's where I would start, right? I kind of want to understand what is it about the in-vehicle feedback that you're getting that you've decided you're going to ignore, and you're going to go out and drive my vehicle the way you want to when 75% or so of the people are able to do it. What is it about your skill level or your choice level that has you decide you're going to drive differently? And then I can see, moving at the lower left, by skill category, how am I doing? So, as a fleet, we've got some challenges in acceleration, braking, corner handling. Lane handling, we're green, so hey, there's good news, bad news. Unfortunately for this particular group that we use for the demo, speed seems to be the worst skill set. So, as I'm thinking about training dollars, I've got very specific areas as an overall group. I can laser focus training dollars, and then also show how we can drill into even more specificity, so kind of down to the driver level as well. So, thought process here, I'm starting at the high level, and then I'm going to move kind of all the way down to the driver. And then the last two things I'll talk about and then move on is idle time. So I'm also seeing that as a percentage of ignition on, my fleet is about 3% idle, which, may be pretty good. I mean, depending on your business model, I think fleets, when we first start working with them, kind of come in around 25% of ignition on as idle time. And that's, tactically something that you really want to get on right, have direct impacts to fuel economy. And then you can also see in terms of idle time, how are people breaking out? So we have red, yellow, and green in terms of. Okay, so next level down. So let's, want to understand how people are doing. So I'm just going to kind of cut to the chase, go all the way down to a driver. So what we see here is the month in the life of a driver, kind of a Pareto chart of their driving. We've got the day of the week along the bottom. We have the segment per day along the left-hand side, and we have a driver who's putting up some green. Some green trips, but overall mostly kind of red and yellow. So, somebody that I really have some good detail and some good kind of a risk signature to work on. The next thing I can do is click on any one of these trips and get the details. So when is the trip, the length of the trip, what vehicle were they in when they had that trip, And then what are the events that made, say, a particular trip red or a particular trip yellow? So, is it a red trip and that trip's made up of a posted road speed violation, a braking event, then a braking into turn? So what are the activities that made that trip bad? And then, the next phase may be, well, let's put that on a map and understand exactly where was that trip occurring. So, if you think back to if I've got 75% of my drivers green, this is the type of work I'd be doing with the red drivers. This would be the type of information that I'd be using to develop, coaching plans. And as you can imagine, you don't have too many coaching sessions with a driver when they see this level of detail, and they also see the organization in which they're working where everybody else is green, where you start to see kind of less and less from a supervisor standpoint need to really intervene with those types of people and to have those coaching events. So, the goal here is ROI. So from a high level, fuel consumption's coming down, lower emissions, repair costs coming down, maintenance, wear and tear, tires and brakes, and then ultimately, as I change my risk profile, I'm going to start thinking about more creative ways to work with my insurance brokers and my underwriters in terms of risk financing. Okay. And then, of course, there's qualitative impacts as well as quantitative. Those qualitative impacts being, protecting my brand image. I mean, the worst thing in the world is to be driving down the road and you see one of your trucks go flying by. Or, it's Saturday afternoon and you're at Home Depot getting stuff and you see one of your trucks in the Home Depot lot and they're not supposed to be there. So, protecting brand image and making sure people are complying with your vehicle use policies. Okay, so I'm going to move now more into building the business case. There are a couple factors here that go into building a business case, and all of the organizations that are on the phone, you're all slightly different, right? It's not a cookie cutter kind of worlds, but at a high level, I think most of us have kind of these inputs that go into building the business case. We have very specific characteristics about our vehicle, the size of our fleet, the types of vehicles we're driving. We have demographics about our drivers, what's the age, where are they located, what skill level, what kind of turnover challenges am I dealing with, and then from a management culture, how am I incentivizing both drivers as well as management in terms of safety, and what is that existing kind of culture. And then when I'm thinking about the management metrics, both quantitative and qualitative, I need to understand, are my goals in 2012 to address potentially a hardening of the insurance market and make sure my rates aren't going up as much, or am I going to be able to negotiate kind of a better deal? Certainly fuel is at everybody's kind of talk track right now is around, how can I immediately start impacting fuel? How is a technology innovation going to impact hiring and retention strategies? How can I make sure that I'm getting the most out of my vehicle depreciation expense? So what I'd like to do is I'm going to walk through an example, and then I'm going to turn it over to Tracy. And Tracy will go into specific detail for the work that his team's done over the last couple of years. So the scenario here is a delivery business with about 100 medium-duty trucks driving about 36,000 miles a year per vehicle, averaging about 5.8 miles per gallon. Budgeted this year for $3.85 a gallon. They're driving short, basically return home at night. So it's a metro delivery fleet, allocating about $1,000 per vehicle per year from an insurance cost standpoint. And today we're at about a 25% non-business purpose idle. So I'm not talking about a power takeoff kind of refrigerated truck that needs to be idling. I'm talking, just kind of unnecessary ignition on idling. From a driver demographic, slightly aging driver population. Got some challenges here because I'm going to need to be hiring new drivers. They're a non-CDL group. I hire them not just to drive, but also because they have some customer-facing kind of requirements. So, that makes it a little bit challenging because I can't necessarily hire, 10-year veteran drivers from CR England. I'm hiring a slightly different demographic here. I do have 1-800 How's My Driving. From a supervisor standpoint, I'm rewarding safe drivers. I'm trying to get to a crash-free culture. My concept of rewarding safe drivers are those folks that haven't had an accident or incident, not necessarily who's actually demonstrating skills, but if you will, somebody who, hasn't been caught. From a supervisor-driver culture, it's a little bit contentious because I'm doing after-the-fact punitive. If there is an accident incident, if there is a 1-800 How's My Driving call, I'm kind of on the drivers, and it's slightly, it's reactive and it's a little bit kind of confrontational. I'm responsible for reducing my cost per mile. in kind of an increasing cost world. So when I look at the management challenges I have, I've got to reduce my costs on the quantitative side. And on the qualitative side, I really have a brand that I need to protect, and I've got, some folks that I want to continue to have working for the company. So if I take those kind of inputs, and the calculator that you can see here, this is a high-level version. It's available on our website at GreenRoad.com. For a more detailed kind of ROI analysis, we have a team of folks that would certainly work with you to prepare that. So what you can see here is a little bit high level, but it is the inputs from what we just talked about. So, medium duty fleet, 100 assets, 3,600 miles per month, about 9% of the vehicles in a crash per year. So those are the high-level inputs, and then you have the ability to expand that tab and get into kind of the next level of detail. Put in your budgeted fuel amount, so in this case about $3.85 for last year. The idle time, as we talked about, 25%, which we want to take a chunk out of. The MPG, which we need to improve, your insurance costs. And frankly, if I change my risk profile, what would I like to get in terms of kind of insurance impact? So, maybe a 10% reduction in how I'm financing for risk through moving to proactive controls and demonstrating I have those controls in place. So, by doing that, by changing that behavior as we've described, taking basically an 8% decrease in my fleet operating costs. So, by line item here, we can get into, how much. What am I paying today? Basically capture what my existing fleet budget is today, and then through behavior change in the drivers, what's the correspondent decrease in fuel consumption, insurance, risk financing, and direct crash costs. Okay, so kind of a summary from an ROI standpoint, and then I'm going to turn over to Tracy. I'm not going to read you the metrics here, but for this particular fleet, you can see what they are to kind of get a high level what they would look like for your fleet. Maybe take the percentages in the bottom and apply them to your particular fleet size. But if we think about kind of the qualitative side of things here, we don't have a combative relationship with the drivers, right? The drivers are now still working hard for our company. They're just equating working hard with now high-performance driving. They're actually competing, right, to be the best drivers, and we've created that culture of, how am I doing, how's my team doing, where am I on the risk scoring, challenging myself as I'm in the vehicle, next time I make that left-hand turn to not receive a negative score. So, I have the autonomy as a driver. I'm self-empowered to go out and to kind of play that game, if you will, and participate in that culture. It also means that as I look at hiring, I can take a risk on younger drivers. I don't have to go for 5-year, 10-year kind of veteran drivers. I could take somebody out of driving school. I can take a younger driver because the day they get behind the wheel, the minute they get behind the wheel, I know how they're going to drive, right? So they go into an employer-employee relationship already knowing what the expected behavior is, and as a supervisor, I have the tools to make sure that they're complying with that. So it's very helpful on both the hiring side, also the retention side. It's not an ambiguous kind of score when who am I trying to keep in my business, right? Knowing exactly who my best drivers are and pairing my younger drivers with my best drivers and keeping that culture going. And I've shifted away from reactive kind of processing of information, right? I'm not looking at last year's crashes necessarily to figure out this year's strategy. I'm looking at what are people doing behind the wheel. Where am I asking them to drive? And I've shifted now to proactive controls, and that includes proactive investment in training. And then from a management standpoint, certainly have transition from after the fact kind of discipline concepts to proactive coaching. And you'll see that in the fleet. You'll see drivers coming in and saying, hey, I just want you to know that I had a red trip, and I was late, and I apologize. And I mean, it really starts to change the dialogue. You'll hear drivers talking about, well, every time I'm doing this, I get this event. And they'll say, well, did you try, going down and doing a U-turn rather than trying to make a left-hand turn across 3 lanes of traffic? You start to move that dialogue strategically and see, where are we asking people to drive, right? What are we asking people to do? Because once we're done, right, once we're done changing the culture and people are responding to the in-vehicle coaching, we're left with a management team that can now look at where are our vehicles and where are they at the most risk for issue, and we can start designing kind of those strategic plans around that. So appreciate the opportunity to spend a couple minutes with you, and with that, I'm going to turn this over to Tracy so he can give you the kind of a real-world example from the Premier Beverage Group at Charmer Sunbelt.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, David. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I'm from Charmer Sunbelt Group, Premier Beverage Company. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you and to share my excitement about GreenRoad and what it's done for Premier Beverage Company. A little bit of background on myself. Over 24 years in safety through the Navy, through my association with ASSE. Also, the company's a member of ATA and the Florida Trucking Association. I did sit on the board of directors for the South Florida National Safety Council for over 10 years, and currently helping with the Transportation Specialty Practice with ASSE, which I think I gain more in to try and learn and do better, to share best practices with each other. A little bit about Charmer Sunbelt. We're part of a big organization that have distributorships in 17 states and 18 markets. Florida, I'm responsible for the state of Florida and the operations there. Family-owned business, so maybe sometimes that is more personal, but gives us some leeway to, what do you want to say, spend more time in the field than probably working on budgets, but we do have to, keep an eye on that. What brought us to GreenRoad, or what brought the Premier Beverage to think about a telematics solution? Well, you can take a look there, 2007, 2008. We had quite a bit increase in our total crash costs. But, our program, I thought we had a pretty good program. We had safety meetings quarterly and sometimes monthly, depending on the issues. We had a decal program on the back of the truck, how's my driving? We had incentive programs. We were paying for no crashes at 2 cents a mile, which was a quarterly safety incentive. We had online training for content. We had good hiring practices, looking at background checks, human resources on board with trying to find the best drivers that we can. And, but we could do better. There was always something we could do better, and we did have a program where we had in-cab training, but it was a little bit slow, took a little bit of time, meaning that I could only train about 6 drivers a day. And with our delivery schedule, Premier has, which may be unique to other companies, but we deliver from Tuesday to Friday. So I had the option of Monday to be able to keep 6 drivers in the plant and work with them in on-road training. But we still, you can look at 2008, the crash costs are just skyrocketing. What are we going to do? We had, or I had investigated telematics and was looking at different programs. And this big jump from 2007, 2008 kind of helped upper management kind of take a look at us and say, Tracy, what can we do? I said, I think we should look at telematics. And so we took a look at GreenRoad, and we implemented their process. And what I liked about it was that it had in-cab immediate feedback. And I equated it to, I don't think I told the drivers this, but for me, in talking about management, it was like having Big Brother sit next to you. And it really wasn't Big Brother. It was having your grandma sit next to you in the seat And you know, if you went a little bit too fast or took a corner a little bit too hard, Grandma had no problem telling you, slow down, Sonny. So I like that. I like the immediate feedback, and the driver was in charge of his own behavior. The driver could decide to be safe or not safe. And guess what? There was a way for the safety department, the managers, to see how the driver was doing on a time weighted 10 hours and the scoring level. And also it was looking at braking, accelerating, lane handling. And really, we had a policy about speeding. We didn't have a policy about braking or accelerating or lane handling and cornering, but we had a policy about speeding. And what it said is that we asked the drivers, require the drivers to follow all state, local laws. And if you're speeding, you're breaking the law. So right there, that was kind of an easy thing to go after. And I do want to tell you that when we had the meetings and we were rolling out the program, it was on a positive level, meaning that we weren't focusing on the fact that, you know, if you don't give the program and have a low score, then your job would be in jeopardy. We focused on the opposite, the positive. And we all know the positive is hard. It's harder. We all are taught, no, you can't do that. No, you can't go there. No, go to bed now. So as we were growing up, it was always no, no, no. So it was a little bit of a challenge. To try and change the culture, to shift the culture to being able to give positive feedback. And I think that is great because GreenRoad is a great mechanism. The blind period was first, and then the first 30 days, which was hard for the managers, was to let the drivers self-change their behavior to become less risky. And as you can see the line, as it goes down in the fourth quarter, and in the first quarter of 2011, you can see a large bump there, right there at the beginning, where we're in the yellow and we go right down to the red. And that was a meeting that was held just about 3 months, 2.5 months into the program, where we had the CEO, we had an all-hands meeting. Sorry about that Navy thing there. All-hands meeting with the drivers to have the CEO let the drivers know that he was watching the program and he believes in it, and it's an important step for Premier to have the program and to help them, help Premier, excuse me, to be safer out there on the roads. Or, you know, we have a public image out there. You may know this or not, but on the side of our trucks we have a full-size graphics on our trucks with our brand names and other companies' names too. So they're just a rolling billboard out there. So we want to have the best public image that we can. So after that, so you can see the large dip there. I went online and showed the drivers, you know, the information that the managers could see, meaning that we were totally upfront and honest. I mean, I don't want to do it any other way. They knew exactly what we could see, that we could tell where, I mean, it does have a GPS part to it where we know where the drivers stop and when they start. So all of that was shown to them, and then a lot of questions from the drivers weren't negative. It was more, well, you know, when I come in, a little bit of it was about the slow speed stops, and sometimes when the truck is full, when the truck is empty. So we worked through all of those issues, and as you can see, the second quarter, well, right after the first quarter, we went green, second quarter green, and as of the third quarter 2011, and the fourth quarter, which isn't on here, we're in the green now. We do not have any red drivers. I have to tell you, when we started, we had a couple that were in the 200 range, meaning that we're looking for a score of 20 or lower. 50 or above is red, and 200 has got to be crazy. So those drivers have been able to slow down their risky behavior, and it gave us some great results in the outcomes of claim frequency and reduced claim costs, which was not surprising, but to have this level of decrease is great. And also it makes me look like a hero to upper management, sailor of wine and spirit. And I have warehousing, office. I have outside sales people to try and convince to be safe. So it frees up my time to do other things in the company that will be helpful to all of us in the end. One other thing I like about the program is that it's easy for the manager. What do I mean by easy? We set up reports that go to the managers once a week. It comes out late Sunday night or early Monday morning, and it gives an accounting of the drivers by color and by if they're green, yellow, or red. And we print that out and have opportunity to have a giant color copier that can do an 11 by 17 sheet, and we print that out and post it by the time clock so the drivers can see how they're doing that week. Also, we have emails for the drivers, and then they can get their weekly score sent to their email, and they can look at it on Sunday night or Monday morning and see how they're doing. Remember, I said we deliver mostly from Tuesday to Friday, so the guys, before they even come in on Tuesday, already know how they're doing. They get a score that tells them what they did for the week compared to the week before. Are they doing better? Are they doing worse? And they compare it to the rest of their peers. So I think that's really great. We're just trying to give feedback to the drivers so they can make the right decisions and drive safer. Measuring the totals, we had a 75% decrease in risky behavior. I mean, how do you document that? We didn't have a way to document that previously unless we did ride with, where we take a manager or myself and we ride with the driver for a few hours or a full day. And some of our routes are 75, 100 miles from the warehouse before we start delivering. So a lot of times, a commitment of 12, 13 hours for a day. Now, I do want to remind you that Florida has a little bit different hours of service, that Florida allows the driver to be on the clock for 16 hours. I know the rest of the country, it's 14. So we're staying in compliance with DOT regulations. Reduction 31% in claim frequency, and of course we already talked about 74% reduction. Now we also documented a 6.8% reduced in fuel costs, which is paid for the program. I mean, you look at that and say, you know, what's the ROI going to be? And, you know, that's a hard cost. That's a hard savings. That's dollar for dollar right in the pocket. And that's really good. And a good selling point to the CEO and trying to get the CFO to unlock the purse a little bit. Oh, so here's our last slide. Bottom line results, we had a cost savings of about $214,000, fuel savings at $17,000, which added up to $231,000. You take cover the van that was stolen. I got a call at 5 in the morning on a Monday, and I was told that my merchandiser went out into the parking lot and his van wasn't there. So I'm thinking, okay, I need to get onto the computer and figure out where the van is. And when we installed the GreenRoad, we tried to install it covertly. So there is the lights there, the green, yellow, and red light. So somebody who has no idea what GreenRoad is and they see the lights and they'll think, well, this is a business vehicle. It has something to do with their business. It has nothing to do with me. So luckily that worked. They parked the van. It was stolen from West Palm Beach and taken over to Lake Okeechobee. I was told it wasn't a very nice neighborhood because I was going to go get in my car and drive up there and try and find the van with the spare keys and steal it back. But I had second thoughts about that, so we alerted the police in the area. They found the van. We recovered it. We discovered it was gone at 7 a.m. We recovered it before 5 p.m. that day. Minimal damage. They broke the lock on the driver door and the steering columns. So there's one success story that isn't even, not even, how much did we save there? Because we didn't lose the van that day. Premier has done well with the program, and I think anyone else will. It's a great program. And with that said, I'd like to turn it back over to David.
Thank you, Tracy and David, both for your presentations. We've already had a few questions submitted from the audience, so let's go right into the Q&A. Tracy, let me start with you. If you could talk a bit about how you get the drivers to buy in to an in-vehicle feedback type of program. Some of the concern, I would imagine, would be that they're being watched too closely, essentially that they're being spied on, if you will. Can you talk a bit about that?
Sure. The spy factor, we've had a decal program on the back of our trucks for 5 years, so we've kind of worked through that a little bit, but for someone who hasn't had any of those type of programs, it's not that we're spying on them, it's just that I think the drivers are intelligent enough to know that there's no one telling them what to do, okay? And I think we as humans do not like to be told what to do, so the lights are guidance. If you're going a little bit too fast, it starts to blink yellow. Hey, you're going a little too fast, slow down, so you slow down. You go around the corner a little bit too fast, and you get up the road a little bit, and it blinks yellow, and you say, oh, well, I went around the corner a little too fast. I should slow down next time. And the record proves that works. And there was minimum to no heartache and reports back from the drivers